Okay.
Madam Chair, you may begin the meeting.
Thank you. Okay, we will call the meeting to order. And I believe we do have 5 members present. Alicia?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 5 members. So if you want to start the roll call for the meeting, just to do audio and video check.
Thank you. I'll begin with Vice Chair Nick Horn.
Good evening, everybody. It's a wonderful day outside.
Councillor Kathy Deagle-Gammon.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad it's a wonderful day outside. We were in budget all day. We kind of missed it.
Deputy Mayor Tim Oathit.
I'm here as well. Missed all today too.
Ryan Donato. I guess not yet. Jordan Foster. Not yet. Gina Jones Wilson. Not yet. I believe Jacqueline Levere is hoping to be here a little later. And we have regrets from Donalda McIsaac. And the last one is Stacy Rotherham.
Good evening, everybody.
Thank you all. And staff members, Thea Langell. Oh, Thea, there she is. Thea is muted.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Thea Langell with the Rural Team.
Shane Vipon, who will be presenting case number 21639.
Hi, Madam Chair. Shane Vipon with the Rural Team as well.
Thank you. Stephanie Saloon.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Stephanie Saloon, planner with the Rural Team as well.
Thank you. Andrea Lavassi Wood, our legislative assistant.
Hi, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Alicia Wall, legislative support. I think you spoke, Alicia. Alicia?
Yeah, President Ann, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, there are no minutes to be approved tonight, but we need approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Do we have any additions or deletions?
Madam Chair, there's no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Thank you. And if any members have any additions or deletions, we have to be aware that they would have to be approved by people who aren't here. I guess there are none. And a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved, Tim.
Nick Horn, second.
Second?
Can you please say your name when you make the motion, please?
Tim moved and Nick seconded.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And all in favor of the motion to approve the agenda?
Aye.
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 Okay. The motion passes, and declaration of conflict of interest. Anyone having a conflict of interest with the business that we're going to be looking at tonight, please say so now. Hearing none. Is there any correspondence?
Madam Chair, there's no correspondence for this evening's meeting.
Thank you. Petitions?
No petitions were received.
Okay, or presentations. And we'll move then on to reports, and number 7.1 on our agenda is the staff report. 7.11, case 21639, which is the Margison Drive Master Plan, Margison Drive and the Highway 101 interchange in Middle Sackville. And that will be presented by Shane Vipond and Stephanie Saloon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin the presentation, I just want to speak a bit about, some of the timelines. We were here at the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee back in 2018, commencing a discussion about the beginning of this master plan process. And ultimately what happened was the developer priorities changed, but we had done a lot of advanced work with the developer before we hit the start button. And then market conditions changed and their priorities shifted, and where we thought we were heading into a planning program, which really was the requirement of the commencement was the submission of technical studies for us to begin to evaluate and begin the process. They had stopped on that, and we went into abeyance. So some members of the committee may actually remember that. We came and we handed out fancy binders and talked and tried to do an orientation with the promise of coming back, and then the world changed, so to speak. And so we find ourselves now back at the beginning again, in a new world, obviously a virtual world, but nonetheless with the promise that the studies are weeks away in some cases and months away in other cases, depending upon the technical things that we're looking at for answers to. So we have enough now within the scope of the overall program. We have enough confidence, shall we say, to begin the commencement again. And so the start of that is tonight. I'm going to go through a presentation. Stephanie and I are going to speak to different parts of the entire project, but we have a lot of information to share with you. We're hopeful that we won't overwhelm you. We have a fairly aggressive schedule, which really ramps up in the middle. And so I'll get to that. Let me share the presentation now. I'll go into that, and then we can get into questions and talk about priorities and all of that. But before I start, let me just say this is not something that is typical for the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee. So this will be unlike a development application, the typical things that you see that come across for your recommendation. This is a large process that really seeks to look to establish policy and then implement that policy on a wider or a larger area of land. So it's made up of a number of parcels, but this is a protracted process. It occurs with a lot of involvement from the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee as the main public participation committee, if you will. So your participation in this is crucial and fundamental to this process. And we don't make a move without essentially reporting back to you and giving you all of the answers to the best of our ability. So we're here as a resource for you, the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee, and we'll get into how you as stakeholders would fare and relate to some of the aspects of the overall master plan. So with that, let me just share the screen and see if I can.
Shane, just while you're getting that set
Sure.
up, this is pretty important, and it is a lot of information, as you mentioned. Unfortunately, we have several people that couldn't make it tonight, so I'm going to suggest that you might want to send this presentation to those, or have Andrea send to those who couldn't be here tonight. You also may have to make yourself available again at some point to give a little tutorial, because there are 2 or 3 new people who aren't here tonight who I think would benefit from this. So just for your consideration.
That's a really good point, Councillor. And in fact, I see that we have a place on the agenda for every forthcoming PAC. So we have a little spot. Perhaps next month we can come back and go over some of this in a brief, if necessary. Let's just see. Let us think about that. But that's a good point.
Okay.
If there are a number of people that are away, then it wouldn't hurt to perhaps share that next time. Okay, so we'll get into this. So the area is in what is known as a local urban growth center. So it is actually the interchange lands of the 101, Highway 101 and Marsden Drive. So that's approximately 59 hectares. That's about 146 acres of land surrounding the interchange. I'll get into what the circles mean in just a moment. But you can see that the master planning process is long. There are a number of steps and a number of sub-steps within the overall process. For example, right now we're talking about public participation, but in fact, we have 3 separate priorities. So we'll be actually going through that public participation process with the public engagement 3 times throughout this overall process. You know, this process might take 24 months, it might take 36. We just don't know yet. It depends on the quality of the information, the way in which we can evaluate that relative to our goals is going to determine our outcomes. So rest assured, we'll be approaching and reviewing this process at various stages and taking you through it. I don't want you to get overwhelmed with having to learn all of those steps. That's Stephanie and my responsibility to walk you through this. You don't need to learn this per se. You need to be aware that we are a resource and that you can reach out to us at any time to ask any questions. So a bit of background. The way that this came about, actually, in 2011, we undertook a community vision with some members of the Northwest PAC. Of course, Anne was the chair of that particular effort, the visioning committee, and we came up with a number of attributes through that community vision that have made their way through into the sort of underpinning or philosophy of some of what we're trying to achieve here. Within the basis of some land use principles and structure. So that was the first component. Then we received applications from Armco, who owns the majority of the lands around the interchange, and the Copaquid Cultural Society, who are looking to develop a cultural center on one of the pieces of land. Now, with the Copaquid Cultural Center, I always have trouble saying that. Council deemed their land surplus, and they're going through a process with council with respect to the acquisition of that, because they are in this is HRM lands that was owned or purchased and allocated to Halifax Transit for a park and ride. So it's like a co-location in a sense, and we may see yet another uptake of Halifax Fire in the future if. But they're at the very beginning of their investigation of the suitability of these lands. So there's more to discuss there. So those are essentially some of the background parts. Again, this is born out of regional plan policy, the Suburban Local Center, which I think is right in here. It's in there somewhere. And it's essentially, what it does is define a growth center. It provides characteristics that we're trying to achieve through that growth. So for example, it establishes medium density. The community vision establishes want for some form of seniors housing. It's suburban development effectively, even though it is just outside the urban service area. And we'll talk about that because there is a plan to extend central water service, but so it will be at least somewhat serviced by municipal services. So these are the lands. Now, as you can imagine, there is existing community plan policy through the Sackville, Beaverbank, Hamilton Plains municipal planning strategy that currently exists. And there are land use bylaws that currently exist through the same planning document. We're going to replace all of those. That's the idea behind this. We're going to, when I talk about replacing, I'm talking about lands around the interchange now, not necessarily the lands that are in McCabe North. And I'll just bear with me because I'll certainly discuss the difference with you. But we're seeking to put policy on all of these lands in and around the interchange and make them unique to the rest of the plan. So this is essentially the master plan study area. And you can see that it's labeled 1 through 7 with McCabe North or the Indigo Shores being 7. And I'll explain their part. Now, here's some of the community vision attributes that we were looking to achieve through the master plan, including, as I say, seniors housing, sustainable development, a variety of housing types, establishing some form of a cultural center, paying attention to the natural environment, ensuring its protection, ensuring that the water resources. Now, there's some specific issues around setbacks to the water course down there, and we've already done a lot of work on what those new setbacks will be in line with the community vision intent and the establishment of new floodplain zoning. So we've already done a lot of work on this, as you can well imagine. So in terms of the public participation piece, which is central to your role and our role as resources to you, we operate under the Northwest Planning Advisory Terms of Reference. And that is that we make key decisions at key points in order to further the planning process. But ultimately, anything that we do will be brought to you. You can consult with the community at appropriate intervals. Now, what that means is that when we go out to do community consultation, be it virtual or if we ever get back to the in-person meetings, that these meetings would essentially be hosted by you. Now, that's not to say that you would have to stand up and do anything, but you would be the overseer. You would be the funnel of information would go to you with our guidance as staff. So, and that's appropriate. And ultimately, we would ask you to make a reference or a recommendation, to community council and ultimately to regional council. So we'll talk a lot about all of this in detail, but this is just an introduction. So I want to get into sort of some of the history, what we foresaw when we did a lot of work back in 2018. We talked with the developers. We have a sense of a starting point with respect to some of the land uses which we feel are consistent with the 2011 vision, but are ultimately things that, while appropriate, would also ultimately evolve under priorities, which would be satisfied in a almost in a consecutive fashion through this planning process. So you can see that parcels 1 through 6, excluding parcel 5, is in the yellow, and you can see what we're looking at. There is a parkland parcel for number 1 that is currently a vacant field. There is what looks to be an interchange development potential on around 2, 3 and 4. 3 perhaps not so much, but we need to explore that some more. But we're looking at multiple unit residential and seniors housing. Again, we'll discuss all of this with you as this is preliminary. And then in parcel 6, this would be another commercial residential mixed use quadrant, if you will. And so all the intensity and the density of commercial uses and residential uses are something that we would bring forward to you potentially in the form of some type of modeling to give you a sense of scale and a sense of place for each of these various parcels. On parcel number 5, this is where the Copaquid Community Center comes in because they have a vested interest in a portion of approximately 2 acres of those lands where they're seeking to put a new community center on there. But given that it's HRM lands and it is currently vested with Halifax Transit, who has within their longer term horizon a plan to put the park and ride facility on there. And there may be potential for a fire station. So all of those things are moving consecutively with the other planning program, or the larger planning program of the master plan. But they have their own process internally because it has some issues with respect to how those lots would be created and that whole thing. So we'll be bringing that to you as well. Some of the decisions of that particular parcel may be outside of the committee's purview because some of those decisions are made essentially by HRM, given that they have the right to proceed with the transit park and ride right now. So it really comes down to planning approvals for the Copaquid Community Center. Again, we'll bring that forward to the committee and have that conversation. And in the blue, we see parcel number 7, and that is Indigo Shores. And what that's meant to reflect is the existing restrictions that are applied to those lands for the growth management policies. So there's a growth management policy that applies to those lands that essentially doesn't allow them to build or create more than 25 lots on an annual basis. And that's a constraint that they want removed. And under the regional plan policy, we can consider this provided we undertake a review in some sort of a secondary planning process. And that's essentially what this is. So we will review that and see if it makes sense. And we would be bringing that to you as well as part of the discussion. So now as I mentioned, we had 3 key priorities. I'm just going to go back. So these are color coded for a reason, because priority number 1 is actually reviewing the growth management policies on parcel 7. Priority number 2 is looking at the Copaquid Center, the Halifax Transit Park and Ride facility, and how those planning approvals can move forward, given that they have an interest in obtaining the land so they can undertake fundraising. Now, there's a long history with the Copaquid Community Center. Some of you may know, but they have been working on this for at least 10 years. And we're at the point now where I think we might ultimately be able to move forward, but we understand that they need planning approval and some control over their lands before they can go ahead and do the fundraising necessary to realize their dream on that lot. So we think that if the proper studies are submitted in a timely fashion, that we can get them there. So we're really looking at 3 stages of implementation through this, or 3 key priorities. Again, we would be bringing this to the committee. The committee would make a recommendation to council, and then ultimately staff would make a recommendation to council as well. And then we would see where it goes. So nothing is assured. Certainly, I just want to ensure that everyone understands that this is a planning process, and we work towards the end. So here are the 3 key priorities, as I mentioned, and these are in priority. Some of these will overlap. Certainly, as we get into sort of the mid, as I say, past the first 6 months to about a year and a half in, this will ramp up in intensity because we'll have some of the work, those studies available to us. So, but these are the three key overall priorities. So I want to talk a bit about stakeholders. So if you can see from left to right, we have the priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3 at the top. So you'll notice that the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee is in fact a stakeholder in everything. So you're the key stakeholder, and then below you are the owners or are the applicants. In this case, Armco is involved in every parcel save for parcel 5, and the CCS is involved with the parcel for obvious reasons, parcel 5. But then we have other participants, Halifax Water, Halifax Fire, and then we get into sort of the technical stakeholders, the sort of the review agency. With our help, we'll seek to derive and distill the information that they provide us. Sometimes we'll offer to bring some of these folks in for a discussion with you if a discussion is required. There are some larger issues with respect to infrastructure, to particularly when we're talking about the extension of potable water, and then when we're talking about the actual road itself, the access to various parcels. Is the road sufficient to handle capacity? Is the interchange sufficient to handle that capacity? Is there any requirement to upgrade any of that? The province owns the highway, obviously. HRM owns a portion of Martin Drive. So we would be working together with them to determine what those costs would be, if there are costs, and you only need to determine that through study. And of course, parks would be involved in that parcel 1. Okay, so in terms of this is a preliminary timeline of the overall project, and it really is at this point, it's just to show you that we've charted at least 3 public engagements or 3 PIMs, 3 public information meetings to deal with each of the priorities. That would be in addition to going to council, to community council first, and then to regional council. So what we think is we can deal with priority 1 within the first 6 months. That's provided we get the study within in the 4th month, and we do the community consultation. Once we're done here tonight, we would begin steps on engaging the community virtually in your name in the Northwest PAC under your banner, so to speak. And then ultimately what we'd seek to do is bring back all of that information to you. So we would bring back the study results. This would be a traffic study, sorry. So it'd be a traffic study that they're commissioning, Armco is commissioning, to talk about Marsden Drive. And this is to deal with priority 1, which is the removal of the growth management policies. So we think that we could bring all that back and seek a recommendation from this committee within about the 4th month, potentially the 5th month. We don't know. I mean, this is fluid. And ultimately, depending upon the result of that and depending on your recommendation, then there is a chance that we will go to regional council, ultimately through community council. So this would be the first PIM 1, and this would be our second. But you know, I'm ultimately, as Councillor mentioned, we may come back next month or in month 3. We've got some things that we want to supply you anyway that we'll talk about in a moment. So that's kind of the first kick at the can of priority 1, the growth management policies. Priority 2 would be dealing with the Copaquid Center. That's not to say, because we anticipate we would get the results of all of the infrastructure studies and other things that we would need somewhere around the 6-month mark. And then, of course, there is the overall program of the rest of the plan area. which of course is in-depth and detailed, and I won't spend too much time on that because we'll have an opportunity to speak about that in greater detail later. Okay, so as you see, this preliminary design here is open because we don't know. We need to see the results of the study. So what we would say is, look, supply us with a land use study, show us, provide some modeling on the basis of some density, and show us what these sort of buildings look like on these lands, and what the uses are that you want, and then let us take it to the committee and see and get your feedback. And that's kind of something that we would do in looking to, and we would do this on a block by block basis. Okay. Okay, so Stephanie, do you want to talk a bit about the
Sure.
Shape Your City one? Thanks.
So given that we're not able to meet with people in person and we would have to have virtual public meetings, we want to allow for a greater range of options for people to participate in this program and provide their feedback, ask questions, and be engaged throughout the process. So we've used Shape Your City for some other planning applications, and we felt that it might be an appropriate tool for this project as well. It's essentially a website that has a range of tools for better online engagement. It's a very interactive application that allows information to be shared between staff, committees, and the public. There are a range of tools and options to collect information through that website. There's options for surveys, forums. There are like interactive ways to post ideas on a map, and we're able to measure some of the responses and some of the feedback through that program as well. So we felt that in addition to having the virtual public meetings, we'd like to share information through the Shape Your City website for this project as well.
Thanks, Stephanie. But in addition, so that would be a resource that we would begin. We've begun work on this already, but that would be in addition to the public information meeting, as I understand it. Am I correct, Stephanie?
Yes.
Yeah, so we would be holding a live public information meeting. That would be one of the requirements is set out in the terms of reference. And so we wouldn't just be putting up the survey, so we would conduct that as well. So when I'm going to get into a bit of the administration, how we want to proceed. So, and also I think this will be fleshed out a bit more with Andrea, and you know, it'll come into its own, this idea, as we get working on it and we seek to improve it. But what we're suggesting is that we come with something known as a decision matrix. And essentially, that's something that we would administer as staff. And it would be effectively the sign off of key decisions that we would make at the end or during our time together to advance the master plan process. And the reason why this is crucial is because in order for us to advance, we can't continue, or we can't begin to swirl on topics. Now, that's not to say that we can never revisit something, but we want to largely move the bulk of the information forward and make progress. And by creating what is known as this decision matrix, we'll have a live document that we can attach, we can make decisions, and that can continue on and on and on until the end of the process. We may even attach it to the staff report at the end, or you know, provide an update to council. But it gives us a beginning and an end. It gives us a record of all of the things that we talked about, those key decisions, and we get consent and a vote, frankly, from the committee on whether or not these are things that we can put to bed and then move on to the next. in order to make some progress. So we'll be coming with that probably next day, or once we begin to ask you for decisions on key issues, then we'll certainly have that as a resource, and we'll be using that going forward. Okay, so I guess at this point I'll just stop sharing, and then so there are a couple of objectives that we're trying to do today. One is to obviously finish this this orientation. Sorry, I'm getting caught up in the Zoom meeting here. But also, we're looking to understand or to sort of lay out the future sort of what am I trying to say? We have a number of slots that we think, for example, we're on the normal agenda, but there may be issues where we need an hour of your time as opposed to 15 minutes or half an hour. And you might have an extra load. That is to say, you've got a number of items coming forward, and you know, there just isn't enough time. And so in that case, there may be the necessity for an additional meeting, and it would be a special meeting. Now, I'm hopeful that we won't have to do that very often, but that may be the case, and certainly not at the beginning. But as we get into sort of that mid portion where it ramps up and where we may be dealing with a number of issues, then we may be required to hold additional special meetings. So that's something that I want to be clear right from the outset. And I think at this point, what I'll do is I'll just turn it over for questions, unless you have something to Stephanie, do you have anything else to add?
No, but I believe Thea has something to add.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Shane, for providing that overview on behalf of the rural team. What I wanted to do is just maybe for the committee, maybe there may be some members kind of wondering like why us? Why is Northwest Planning Advisory Committee being looked at as a group to kind of take this on and be part of this project? So I wanted to provide a little bit of context on that piece as well. So under the HRM Charter, that is the legislative document that regulates basically how we do planning business within the municipality. And when we are looking at making changes to planning documents, which would be a municipal planning strategy as an example, we are required to put together a public participation program. In this particular area, we have a unique set of circumstances where we also have our Northwest Planning Advisory Committee. And we recognize that you have situations where you're looking at kind of these individual developments. They come in as a site-specific proposal, you make your recommendation, and it goes on. But under the legislation, there's the opportunity for advisory committees to kind of roll their sleeves up a little bit more and kind of be actively involved in kind of the review of what Shane's described, which is this master plan program. And what we felt is the PAC was the right group to work with rather than creating a separate committee. So we were going to have some form of steering committee or committee involved in this program. And rather than creating kind of a new group, we felt it was right to come to this particular committee and work with you directly. Through my experience, and Anne will remember when we did the Sackville Drive secondary plan and municipal planning strategy, we involved PAC quite regularly through the whole thing. So when then you finally saw the final document, you knew how it got there. You knew how the package was put together and why things were the way they were. We've done other examples where we've had one or two members sit on a committee, and that can create challenges because you're only relying, and Anne was involved again with the Union Street CCDD, and that kind of, so we've done both ways, but we really feel that with this particular project, the scope that it is, especially where we have a lot of new members, that are coming forward. It's a great opportunity to kind of see how planning starts from the beginning, and work through this. So we're going to be working with the clerk's office and yourselves to kind of, keep you informed as we go through with information, and kind of help you and guide you through, and be looking to you for some recommendations. But again, that's a little bit of background as to why this committee, why we've chosen this, and hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity if there was any questions on that.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, so Shane and Stephanie, you're ready for questions from the committee, are you?
Certainly.
Okay, we'll begin with Vice Chair Nick Horn. Questions, comments, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one question. Is there, this is going to be a lengthy process as it was stated in 2018. I'm just wondering, is there a guidance document or like a set of policies that this project is being governed by that we can sort of have for reference in the future?
So this process is actually being guided or enabled through the regional plan policies. Now, do you have a copy of the staff report? I think that was sent out. I'm just wondering if you have a copy of the initiation report. It's in the back of the initiation report. It's a 2018 staff report. It'll have all of the relevant policies in the back. Now, it's up to us to guide this program to the necessities that arise out of it. So it's essentially like any planning program. We tend to move forward, but we might have to go northeast instead of northwest, and or sideways, one side instead of the other. And that just depends on where it takes us. So it's overall the planning program that we showed you the process, and we'll make this presentation available to everyone. That process is essentially the master plan process, which is typically a charter-based planning program for policy. But there are some changes and nuances to every one of these planning programs. And specifically with this one, and I mentioned this early when we were talking about the parts of the master plan, we had that highlighted piece for the community consultation. In this particular case, we're actually sorting out 3 different objectives or 3 different priorities. So you won't find that in anywhere because it's a nuance to this particular program. So we'll actually be going through the community consultation 3 times, as opposed to one larger master plan where we have something at the end, or a few PIMs and some workshops and things like that, which we can't do now. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but anyway, I gave you everything. Hopefully that.
Sort of. If there's a dumbed down version of that, like for instance, at every public meeting, like PIM that we host, there's a list of the process and where you stand in that process with regards to the application at hand. This is a large file, so I'm wondering, is there something like that we can sort of, like a scrum almost, where you can check things off?
Yeah, we have that, but we don't have it in a simplified form. That's why we have a project plan. We have an old project plan. It's still evolving into the new phase. But I think we'll make that available to you in like you say, a simplified form. And that'll give you a sense of the timeline. It'll give you a sense of the issues. Right, Stephanie, do you have anything to add with that? I saw you were going to, because I think that you were going to say that, weren't you?
Well, I think what Nick is looking for is almost like the policy matrix that we would typically have in a planning application that's brought to the PAC. But this is a different kind of project where, like Shane is saying, the policy that exists is at the regional level, and it's very high level policy. But through this process, we will be creating the more specific policy criteria. So it's not a checklist or a list of criteria that we would typically bring to PAC, but we will be working on this decision matrix, which will sort of help you and guide you in coming up with some of these decisions and what should be included in that policy criteria that we would be creating through this process.
Okay.
Does that help anymore?
That helps. Yeah, basically that's sort of what I was looking for was a way to see what's coming up next and sort of a way to give things full consideration with regards to, you know, what's coming and what has been completed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. I don't see that Ryan has arrived or Jordan. Gina? No. Okay. Jacqueline is here now. So Jacqueline, did you hear some of what was said earlier?
I got here after the discussion was pretty much finished. I just joined. I had another meeting.
Yes. Okay. Well, if you would like to just hold on and see if you have questions later, you can do that.
Can I ask a question now?
Pardon?
Can I ask a question now?
Yes, you can.
So I guess I'm new to this committee, and since we seem to be having a discussion process, if I'm understanding this correctly, I have a question. When we have our meetings, there is not a lot of time to ask questions without there being also guests and developers. And so I guess I'm just asking on the process side, whether there is any room to have an initial discussion about what is coming before other people join the call. Since we can't be in a room, sometimes it might help us get a better understanding if we just got, in French we say survol of the issues, like an overview of the issues that will be addressed in tonight's meeting. It's just something I'm asking. It might not be possible, but I'm just asking whether it is.
Okay.
Do you want me to speak to that, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
So, well, it's a public meeting, so anyone, the public is entitled to attend as soon as we begin the meeting. That's certainly the case of all PACs. We can certainly provide an agenda in advance to give you sort of a sense of all of the issues that we're intending to cover prior to the meeting. And I think, I don't know if you were here, Jacqueline, when I discussed with the committee that we have a slot, or will have a slot on every PAC meeting going forward. So hopefully over time, we'll be able to carve out enough committee work time that we will, but it's our intention as staff members to invite developers and various technical experts when required. Now, that's not to say that developers might not want to attend because they have a vested interest, but really it's about working with the committee. And then when we seek their input, we're hopeful that they'll be there to provide it. So hopefully that will satisfy this as we go along, and we'll see how it works. I mean, as I said before, if we find that we don't have enough time within the allotted schedule, then we may have to look to an alternative meeting schedule to satisfy it properly. But I don't expect that right off the bat, but certainly, you know, after the 6 month period, I think we'll be certainly getting into it and getting busy.
Okay. Okay, that helps.
Can I ask one more question?
Pardon?
May I ask one more question, Chair?
Certainly, yes.
I'll put my camera on it. I guess I wonder about the in-person, whether we ever get there and what prevents us from having, from being in a room, we can have a large enough room to have physical distancing. And even with allowing maybe the public through Zoom and we could get together, or I don't know if it's hybrid or if anything like that's been considered.
Madam Chair, perhaps I can answer this question.
Okay, thank you.
So Jacqueline, currently, HRM is all of their meetings are being held virtually, and it has a lot to do with the physical distancing requirements. But what we are planning is during Shane and Stephanie's presentation, they had indicated that through this process of considering the Murchison master plan is that there will be at least 3 PAC hosted public information meetings. And those meetings will actually be held using Zoom and be live broadcast like our meeting is this evening. And at those meetings, members of the public, they'll be notified of the meetings in advance that they're happening, and they can register to speak and give their feedback and ask questions regarding the master plan at each of those 3 public information meetings. As well, for public engagement, Stephanie had detailed how there will be a Shape Your City survey on the halifax.ca website that will be used to encourage public engagement and sharing of opinions on this process. So hopefully this process is being estimated to be around 24 months, if a little bit longer. And hopefully within that 24 months period, we'll be at a stage with the public health restrictions lifting that we will be able to start having those public information meetings and our regular monthly meetings to be back in person. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'm seeing in the chat that we see. Oh, Thea, did you want to add something?
Actually, Madam Chair, that was after Shane's presentation, and I've already done so. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And Shane, was there something else you wanted, or was that an early one too?
Well, I noticed that that a number of committee members haven't been able to make it tonight. I think it's important that that we take them through the presentation as well and have a conversation with them. This is going to be a little bit different, this virtual thing. I mean, I've never worked with a committee in a virtual way before, I'll have to admit. So this is new ground for me. But we'll do our best. I think we can do a pretty good job, particularly given the way that we've set out the priorities. I think there's less committee resources required initially for the priority number 1, the first objective, because we will do a lot of that work behind the scenes, and it really isn't going to be too heavy on the committee in terms of that particular issue. That being said, you know, the orientation piece is important. So we'll have a talk in-house. I see Thea has her hand up, so perhaps she wants to weigh in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be completely honest. I did not know I had my hand up. I was looking for that option. So please forgive me if it's up. I do not know how to put it back down.
Well, I don't see it.
Or I was looking at the,
Shade is it. Okay, no.
yeah, I've got vision. At any rate, so we'll talk about this as a staff to determine whether or not we feel it's appropriate to come back out and go through this in round two. It makes sense, but we'll have to discuss it, see what the options are. But certainly, so our next phase going into this, based on priority one, while we await the commissioning, or the studies have been commissioned, but while we await their delivery, we're going to do some background research on some of the issues that we need to do with respect to those growth management policies on those McCabe lands. So we've got a number of things and a lot of work to sort through there. We'll get the community consultation piece up and running, and hopefully we'll have a date, and this committee will be made aware of that date, but hopefully we'll have it soon, and then we can undertake that, do the surveys, get all that information collected, and then get the results of the study back, and then we'll bring it back to you in a manageable form, have a conversation, see whether or not you feel that it's appropriate to recommend, and at that point you'll either recommend approval, refusal, or you'll defer, depending on the outcome of that, and then staff will go ahead and draft a report. And you know, something could come up in the interim that delays all of this, of course, because this is planning, but that's kind of the simplified version of how we would go forward in the first priority. So that's about it for this evening. I don't know if there is
we still have some other people who may have questions, so I'll go through that first, and then we can see what we have left. Okay. Stacy Rutherham is the next person on my list. Do you have any questions or comments there, Stacy?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple things I just was curious about was number one, with the development of the residential lands, any changes to the plan would obviously be impacting the plans for fire department, water, and all of that as well, but they come later. And so I'm kind of curious about the history on that situation, because you mentioned that there was a lot of work done already, and that's 25 lots per year piece was done based on resources available and so on. I'm just curious if we're going to maybe get a little bit of enlightenment on the history of that, and what work had been done previously and how that's sort of playing into things today. And I also am just also curious about the timelines, like why that is taking priority over the other pieces of the puzzle.
Sure. Good questions and appropriate. I know that there was a lot of information that I put out to you this evening, and so there's a lot to take in. And I think the way that we'll approach this going forward is we'll take it step by step, and we'll talk about we'll take snippets and try to ensure that they're in their own collective boxes, if you will. And you're talking about McCabe North and why that's priority number one. Well, essentially, there are growth management policies that apply to McCabe North, and those growth management policies apply to many areas across this area of the municipality. You might there's a certain. I won't get too deeply into the growth management policies right now, because I think we'll be having this conversation later, but certainly that's part of the analysis. So what those growth management policies do is they put limitations on the number of lots that can be created to slow growth where lands were created and they weren't strategically planned. The thing about McCabe North is they've had those subdivision approvals in advance for some time, and only a portion of their lands are subject to the growth management policies. So we look at, and I won't get into the rationale, but the reason why we're actually looking at those growth management policies, as opposed to dealing with, say, the Cobequid Cultural Center or those residential blocks that you're referring to, if you're referring to some of the other undeveloped portions of the master plan that aren't at McCabe North, is because we don't have to rely on anything else save for a traffic study. And the traffic study can be ready for us within 8 to 10 weeks, probably even less now. We'll say 8 weeks from now. So that makes sense to take that off the list because it doesn't rely, it's not resource heavy on the community or on the PAC's end. It just requires that we do our research in-house and we can take that priority off the list and make a decision. Now, we're not going to presuppose that those lands or that the growth management policy should be removed until we do the analysis. So that's still an unknown question, but we can do the review and research the things that we need to without getting into the rest of the master plan priorities. So it makes sense to be the first one to come off the list. We think that the second and third priorities, that is the Copwood Center and then ultimately the larger master plan, some of that's going to run concurrently. So when we say second priority, we just think that we could finish the Copwood Center potentially within a year. We know we can't finish the entire master plan within a year. So, but we think we can finish that piece within a year. So everything would be going concurrently at that point, but that would be a separate piece that we would deal with. In terms of the residential functions of the plan, I mean, I spoke about supplying sort of models for the community, understanding the densities and intensities of those land uses on those various quadrants. That takes time, study, infrastructure. It's a longer term effort. Priority one, which dealing just with the growth management policies, is sort of, I hate to use this phrase, it's kind of low hanging fruit, if you will. Because it's an easy one to deal with out front. So I guess that's my response to that one.
Okay. Is that helpful to you, Stacy?
I guess it's helpful, and that's the explanation. But I guess to my mind, it still seems like it's a bit out of order. So I guess we'll see what happens.
This is something that's not something that we do every day, and even for me, it's a little hard to figure out exactly what's happening. But you'll find as the time goes along, it will fall into place, and you'll see what's happening a lot better. We're not even in the door; we're standing on the doorstep with this one. So, yeah. So I'm going to go to the rest of the committee and see if we have any more questions here. Councillor Digo Gammon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Jane and Stephanie. I don't know if everybody else is finding it, but the sound is rather staticky and echoey.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll slow down my Cape Breton and maybe talk slower. So if I understand correctly, is the request to this committee to agree to this process and to agree to our role in this process. And with all due respect, I think Thea gave a really good explanation about why now and why this committee. And I'm a new member to the committee. And so with all due respect to members who have been at this for a while and everything, I guess I would ask very respectfully, is this the group that has the right talent and skill in order to assist in moving this all forward? So I do say that with all due respect. I absolutely don't mind learning. I'm really good at that. But I understand that the learning curve that I'm going to need may indeed hamper your process. So just I'll be upfront with that. And so the other thing I wonder, and a little bit to Stacy's comment, is that the three objectives, I see them as interdependent. I understand why priority one was chosen, But yeah, I guess I'm just a little concerned about the interdependency. And then given the consultation process, given everything that's going to happen, is it possible that those objectives may change over time? That based on the information that comes back. And I look at this now and I see all kinds of infrastructure requests and capital funding requests. And I'm wondering who's going to pay for the water, who's going to pay for the fire stations. And we've got that need elsewhere in HRM. So how does that all get prioritized? And in asking all those questions, does that mean that that is our work to do?
Oh, sorry, Shane, I was going to jump in. So Councillor, maybe there was one of the points, and maybe this will help the member to Stacy who had raised the question. With regards to priority 1, that is a scenario where the land use has already been chosen for those lands. It has been chosen to be a residential subdivision. The subdivision has basically been approved. It's more about when exactly, the rate in which it can be built. And there's really, I think about half of it's already been built. So when we looked at kind of the overall master plan, those other 2 priority areas, they're new ideas. They're new land uses that haven't been contemplated in the area under the existing policy structure. So we need to kind of lift that up and take a look and see, are these the land uses that are appropriate? But with priority 1, that decision has already been made. It is for a residential subdivision, and it's really about when should it be completed? And we think we can get enough of the technical information to answer those questions to move that one along first, and then we'll be able to focus on priority 2 and 3. And yes, 2 and 3 definitely are interchanged and they have some overlap in them, but hopefully that provides some of the clarification for you, Councillor and Stacy, with regards to priority 1. The other piece I wanted to add in terms of, is this committee the right committee? I absolutely believe you are the right committee. Under the charter, the Planning Advisory Committee and your terms of reference is that you provide recommendations to Community Council on planning matters. And we feel this is an opportunity for this committee to kind of see how those planning policies are being created at the beginning, rather than looking at a specific development after the fact and comparing the policies. So I believe we do have the right committee here, and I believe you're in very good hands with Stephanie and Shane to kind of walk you through this process, and we'll be doing and going through it together. You're not going to be in a situation where you're going to be asked to provide advice or weigh in on something that's not your area of expertise. We're here to help you with that and kind of walk you through those steps. And it's really hearing what collecting what you're hearing from the community and providing kind of your advice as to how that should fit into this package, very similar to what you do on a single site, but now you're going to be doing at a little bit of a larger scale. So hopefully that provides some clarification, and sorry, Shane, there for jumping in.
And just around the piece around the whole capital and infrastructure,
right,
and where that all gets planned, if you might give a moment to that.
Absolutely. So again, with the priority 1, we feel that we have the information we need with regards to making the decision if there's any infrastructure and whatnot. So we wouldn't have selected that one as a priority 1 if there was a concern from that. The other 2 priorities, that's part of what we look at when we start to kind of open it up and look inside in terms of what do these land uses mean? Do we need to have infrastructure approved from a very high level? And Shane and Stephanie can kind of correct me on this one. I don't think we've seen anything that raises the red flags for us, because whatever flags we did have, we identified to regional council. But again, as we go forward, that's part of what we look at and balance as we're reviewing priorities 2 and 3.
May I ask one more question, Madam Chair? Yes, okay, great. How, and a new process, and I appreciate that language and thank you for it. So we're in a place where we've never been before. When I think about what's happening in another part of my district that's around the Port Wallace development, is this a similar process that is being applied?
Yeah, so actually I can speak to that as well, Madam Chair, to the councillor. So it is very similar, Port Wallace and this one, but the difference is Port Wallace doesn't have a PAC for that area. right? So if you kind of look at it in that comparison, there is no PAC in that geographic area, but there is for this area. So we felt that, you know, the PAC was the right group to look at. We've taken a similar approach in the past when we did the Sackville Drive plan. So yes, there's definitely some similarities, and hopefully that provides that clarification.
It does. That's exactly the answer I needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and Deputy Mayor Tim.
Thank you. And I want to sort of dovetail on where Stacy and Kathy started. And I'll tell you, Kathy, the other day I was talking with Tony, and I told him I was going to put together a memo about what went right and what went wrong in West Bedford, and what we need to learn from Royal Hemlocks that was done in the 90s, Bedford done in the 2000s, West Bedford, and what we should be doing in the 20s. And I'll do this because I hope, I'm going to do this. It's going to take me a couple of minutes, but I hope staff will find this helpful. I hope the developers, if they're listening, will help this helpful. And Kathy and Lisa, if you're still with us, I hope you find this helpful, because I've gone through 10 years of us building a town. And there's been some good, and there's been some bad, and there's been some ugly. And the good has been the wonderful paths and trails, the parks, working with wonderful developer, having some facilities in place, having CCCs in place to help improve some infrastructure, and having improved some roads before Bedford South and Bedford West were allowed to be occupied. But there have been a lot of things, and I'm very encouraged when I see, for example, you want a commercial center approach. Well, that was missing in West Bedford, and I think we would do that differently. The streets should be designed for 40 kilometers an hour, not 50, not more, because we now, through the IMP and complete streets and whatnot, are going to have to go back to West Bedford and streets that are being built within the last few years and tomorrow, and streetcom. And that irks the heck out of me. Transit has got to get in there sooner. That's a big mistake we made in West Bedford that we hopefully will do better here and for Port Wallis. The amenities for all ages have got to be in there sooner. It's one thing to have a playground for the 3-year-olds, but when the 3-year-olds are suddenly 13-year-olds, and these are new construction, and new construction aren't capped tax rates, people are paying $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year property tax. They are not willing to wait 5 or 10 years for improvements to the playground, a skate park, a pump track, a tennis court, these sorts of things. We've got to have a plan for these amenities in place. The streets have got to be complete streets, and they have got to be designed as safe streets. I don't like cul-de-sacs. You can't plow them, and you can't give them transit. They're terrible for those two things. If we think that folks, even though it might be in the plan, and it's on the map, and it's in the sketches, that if we think that people who buy single-family houses want to be near multis, again, we are wrong. They may be wrong in the sense that what they feel that the multis will do, but we have got to understand that there has to be more explanation of what's going to be built in these areas for potential buyers, but also there has got to be more distancing, in my opinion, between the multis and the single families for the initial buyers and for subsequent buyers. I think we have to do more to protect the trees during development. And we've got to start looking at what they're doing in other provinces and other countries, where you don't flatten every tree within miles to build the home or to build the building. The CCCs are a good thing. They need to be expanded. Several people have mentioned already what happens if we need a fire station, what happens if we need transit and whatnot. The CCCs have got to be in place, particularly in Port Wallis, perhaps here as well, for these kind of improvements that are required. Everything from streets and road improvements through to the kinds of things that we've had. We had to buy the land in West Bedford to do the community center. We had to buy the land to do the BMO. The provincial government had to buy the land to do the schools. That should not have happened. And we're learning more for Port Wallis, the larger scales, but going forward, we have got to change and be more like what they do in other provinces and make developer fees and developers and the CCCs responsible for more of these growth charges. And don't even get me started on construction noise and blasting and whatnot. We have got to, and this is coming back to council. If we think, I'm going to a place here, if we think that folks are going to put up for 5 or 10 or 15 years of construction noise, particularly blasting and rock breaking, which in my opinion now can go weekends and evenings, and we've got to look at changing that, I think we're mistaken. The developers hear constantly, council does, staff does, about the construction noise. The reason I mention construction noise is because I think this is going to impact how you phase this development. I do not think most people buying a home want to know that there's an end in sight. They don't want to know that, well, this street or this 25 is going to be done this year, then this 25, then we're going to start here, then we're going to start there. And telling people that they're going to have to put up with 5, 10, 15, 20 years of construction noise and dust and debris. And make no mistake, the dust and debris are incredible. Not a day goes by that I don't hear about construction debris and these sorts of things. I think the sooner we can get these communities built, the better. I think the more master planned they are, the better. But we have got to start taking a big holistic view of these, of what the people moving into these districts, these new communities require as far as amenities and transit and quality of life, even during construction. And we've got to have all these things in place before, just like in West Bedford, you could not start building and occupying homes in South Bedford until the Camas Plains Road was widened, until the Larry Utech interchange was open, et cetera, et cetera. So learn about what we did right in West Bedford, but particularly when it comes to Fort Wallace, learn from what we did wrong. And I think there's a lot, and I've just highlighted a few of those because I was preparing my thoughts for Tony. Anyway, I hope that's helpful for staff and the committee and the developers and my council colleagues. And I certainly, we have to keep learning, and we have to realize that our world has changed. Our citizens now expect amenities sooner. They expect us to be more green. They expect us to be more environmentally conscious, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I hope that's helpful, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sure it was helpful to those who haven't been on the committee for a long time. And I mean, that is most of the committee, believe it or not. But this is going to be a learning experience for pretty well everyone. It's been a long time since I've been involved with, well, the Bedford West, all the ins and outs of that, and we're still seeing those come back as development agreement changes and moving buildings from here to there, and that's where all of it started. Just like this is starting. So don't feel that you don't know enough. You will know enough by the time we're finished. I guarantee you, because it'll break down into smaller parts. And those parts will be easier to understand once we get to them. Okay, you can't think about the whole thing in one piece right now. It's got to be broken down, and that will happen. And if that is all the questions that we have for tonight, I'm going to thank you all for being here, and thank anyone who was watching online for coming and watching us and how we work. And all I have to say from here on in is that our next meeting will again be a Zoom meeting, I assume, on May 5th at 7 p.m. And Andrea, do you want to, you left a note on the end of this. Do you want to handle that, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to make mention that planning staff's been in touch with me regarding case 22267, which is an application for development at Dartmouth Road and Wardar Street. They are attempting to schedule a virtual PAC hosted public information meeting for that case. And they're hoping to have it scheduled for some time in early May. I don't have a firm selection of dates for that yet, but I thought I would canvass with you in terms of people's availability for May 10th, 12th, and 17th, as whether or not those are good options.
Andrea, it's Tim. When did this information come forward? Because my last discussions with planning was that they were still tabulating the results. We were going to be calling in a meeting with the developer, and that we were probably going to be delaying PIMS for a little longer while we did some preliminary work, because there's been so much negative feedback on this, both quality and in the amount of negativity. When did you hear about this? Because this is a bit of a surprise to me.
Sean Gillis, the planner on the case, emailed me about this late last week.
Okay, sounds like I need to circle back with the gang here, but anyways, you go ahead and do what you have to do. But I'm hoping that we won't even get this to a PIM until they make some significant changes to what they're proposing. That's going to be my objective. But anyway, that is what it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess, Andrea, the best way to handle this, where we're rather short on members tonight, is to send out an email with that information in it, and see what the feedback is.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Madam Chair. But I will wait to hear back from Sean in terms of what dates they're thinking of. I just thought I would canvass it if it would be helpful if we had more members present. But I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that planning staff was thinking about early May for this potentially.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I won't ask anybody to commit themselves tonight. I will give you a chance to go home and go home. You're already home. Come on. Go and look at your calendars and see how that works out for you. And I'm sure when you get the email from Andrea, you can just let her know what's best. Okay? And I will now ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you.